Today, I'll begin with the first of two parts on historical foodways in America. And I'll do this through telling a few short stories or vignettes. The two that I'll tell today are about the Spanish colonists in South Carolina, dating to the early to mid-16th century, and the British colonist in Virginia in the early 17th century. My next set of stories will be on the French colonist in Louisiana during the 18th century, the British colonist at Charleston in the 18th century, and the effects of colonization on South Carolina Indian diet between the 16th to the 18th centuries. These are all stories about colonial encounters between different peoples. Each of these stories has several viewpoints. For example, people's beliefs about what constitutes food. Or foodways, referring to food in a social and cultural setting. Food's effect on body, or on people, or food identity. And colonialism, somewhat from both sides of the coin. I begin with the premise that people prefer to eat their traditional diet, the one that they grew up eating. In these vignettes, you'll see some of these watercolors by John White, painted about 1585. And John White was in the lost colony of Roanoke and did wonderful illustrations of what he saw among the Indians there in eastern North Carolina. And this one says, the seething of their meat in pots of earth. The first vignette, the Spanish, who first visited the South Carolina coast beginning in 1515 and settled Santa Elena in 1566 to 1587. The Spanish who arrived along the coast preferred to eat wheat bread, olive oil, wine, and mutton. Being Catholics, they had a religious need for wheat wafers and wine. Therefore, they felt deprived when, by necessity, they instead had to eat cornbread and fish. The Spanish established Santa Elena in 1566, which was the first capital of La Florida. It was located in southeastern South Carolina in what is now Beaufort. Santa Elena was occupied off and on between 1566 to 1587, and 2 years after its establishment, 225 settlers arrived, including farmers, Catholic missionaries, and families. Spanish settlements and forts in the New World were supposed to be self-sufficient. But in practice, at least at Santa Elena, they depended on shipped provisions as well as food from the local Indians. The Spanish colonists at Santa Elena raised Old World animals such as pigs, chickens, and cows that could survive with minimal care. Sheep did not do well there, so they could not eat the mutton that they preferred. But for meat, they depended upon local fish and shellfish, and secondarily on wild game, such as deer, wild bird, and turtles. At Santa Elena, most of the settlers' plant-based diet consisted of local indigenous crops, such as maize, beans, and squash, foraged wild nuts, especially hickory and acorn, and fruits. Some Old World crops, mainly peach, fig, melon, and watermelon that could be grown locally, were grown by these earliest settlers. And only rarely did they have imported foods at Santa Elena, such as wheat, olives, European wine grapes, and hazelnut. Let's turn now to the British, who settled coastal Virginia in the early 17th century. They established Jamestown Colony in May of 1607, when over 100 colonists arrived from England. They were sent with limited provisions, and in the first year people went hungry, and controversies arose over food. Why did starving colonists refuse to eat maize from Indians? Why did they turn down wild foods, such as venison? They called such food savage trash. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the British believed that their identity depended on what they ate. The Bible separated humans from the rest of the animal kingdom, but differences between humans depended on heat and moisture. And the major sources of heat and moisture were the foods that people ate and the climate in which they lived. So heat and moisture determined your sex, appearance, intelligence, character, morality, and all other aspects of a person, the humoral body. You ate food befitting your status, and the food you ate affected the physical, mental, moral, and spiritual qualities of the eater. So maintaining social order depended in part on maintaining the proper diet for your social status. A change in the diet meant a change in a person, and the more different the diet, the greater the degree of change. This idea arose out of the broad metaphysical theory that the entire universe was composed of four immaterial qualities: hot, cold, moist, and dry. These qualities combined and appeared in physical form as the four elements of earth, air, water, and fire. Every human was seen as a miniature reflection of the universe. That is, each human was a microcosm within the macrocosm. Human temperament depended on the ratio of the four humors and was the foundation of the philosophy of the humoral body. The humors were choler, meaning hot and dry, represented by a circle of fire; blood, which is warm and moist, represented by air; phlegm, cold and moist, represented by water; and melancholy, cold and dry, represented by earth. The elements comprise the building blocks of identity for all nature. Differences between things depended simply on the ratio of their elements. And elemental ratios fluctuated greatly, and this process of flux was one of transmutation. Earth turned into water, fire, or air. Fire turned into earth, air, or water, and so on. When the elements in an organism transmuted, the organism also changed. Now, what caused elements to transmute? Well, whatever altered heat and moisture. On the cosmic level, this could be the sun and the moon. Globally, it could be the climates and the seasons. And personally, 6 factors known as the non-naturals. And these were food, exercise, sleep, air, repletion, and emotions. Eating foods other than the customary diet for one meal or one day prompted small, fleeting changes in a person. But a long-term radical dietary change, such as you might get by moving to Virginia, oh my goodness. Although the environment was the molding tool of the human body, humans believed they could control environment to remake their physical, mental, moral, and emotional selves into any shape they wished. Different combinations of humors and transmutations of the elements created many human traits, collectively known as the temperament or complexion. Human temperament depended on the ratio of the 4 humors and was the foundation of the philosophy of the humoral body. The temperamental types, from least to most desirable, were melancholic, choleric, phlegmatic, and sanguine. The melancholic, seen as the lowest or least desirable type of human or temperament of a human, was cold and dry, fostering sadness, fear, and a slow-paced, brooding nature, similar to beasts. Choleric included the most fire element. These people have an inflammatory nature with quick wits, sharp voice, impatience, boldness, inconstancy, and fighting. Phlegmatic has a cold and moist nature. They move and learn slowly, and they're dull in nature. Whereas sanguine approximated the perfect humans. White and ruddy complexion, plenty of hair, often with a red tint, tending toward fleshiness, large veins and a great full pulse, fun-loving, they laugh, sing, enjoy music, enjoy drinking good wine and eating excellent food. They learn science easily. They seldom lose their temper, they're gentle, amorous, and they digest food perfectly. Body parts also had a temperament, so each individual was individualistic. Health was viewed holistically, the entire body, the whole person, their performance. To achieve virtue, you needed to strive for the golden mean, that is, health as a balance in the center between the extremes of cold, hot, wet, dry. Few people are born with the golden mean or with virtue, but you could work to acquire it by living a lifestyle that fostered it. Food was the most important vehicle for achieving balance and the golden mean. All foods were classified to 6 degrees of heat and moisture. Food was used as building blocks of the body, and the amounts and proportions of food eaten affected your humoral balance. Foods were assigned humoral qualities. The 5 elementally hot tastes included hot, sweet, salty, bitter, and sharp. And 3 elementally cold tastes were rough, sour, and harsh. Food texture also mattered. For example, light and delicate versus dense and heavy food. Lighter food formed highly refined people, whereas coarse food made a person coarse and unable to achieve the golden mean. In other words, the perceived qualities of the food transferred to the eater. This philosophy of food affected the social structure of early modern England. English identity was tied to a common diet of bread, pottage, meat, fish, dairy products, fruits, and vegetables. But people of higher status ate better quality food, more variety, and an adequate quantity. And in fact, they were the only ones in English society with continual food security. They were, therefore, also the only ones who could achieve virtue, and thus the only people fit to rule. To summarize, when the British first colonized America, people were what they ate, but they also strove to eat what they were. Very definite ideas about proper diet were based on the idea that humans reflected the 4 humors of nature. You ate food befitting your status, and the food you ate affected the physical, mental, moral, and spiritual qualities of the eater. So maintaining social order depended in part on maintaining the proper diet for your social status. The Jamestown colonists experienced starvation in their first 20 years of settlement, due in no small part to their rigid ideas about who should farm, who should eat imported, refined food versus local, coarse foods, and their disdain of maize as a human food. They saw it instead as a livestock food. And in fact, over the winter of 1609, this 14-year-old young woman was the victim of cannibalism. So she died a natural death, but afterwards her body was eaten. About 80% of colonists died that winter, and by the spring of 1610, only about 60 people remained. Interestingly, these settlers also had rigid ideas about cannibalism, that it was okay in a dire situation such as starvation, but that women should eat only the women bodies and men should eat only the male bodies. So today I've given 2 short vignettes or stories about the Spanish colonist in South Carolina from the early to mid 16th century and the British colonist in Virginia in the early 17th century. And in my next presentation, I'll talk about French colonists in Louisiana during the 18th century, British colonists at Charleston during the 18th century, and the effects of colonization on South Carolina Indian diet from the 16th to the 18th centuries.